Good afternoon, folks. Now, this afternoon's topic C, we're going to discuss COVID and brain shrinkage. Okay? It is connected, guys. I'm going to go through the narrative I made for you presentation. Okay, so please enjoy. Okay. The first time I noticed something was different, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't frightening, it was a moment so small I almost let it pass. I was standing in my kitchen holding a spoon, trying to remember what I had meant to do with it. The thought had been there, bright, clear, and then it wasn't. I dissolved it. It dissolved like breath on a cold window. I laughed it off. Pandemic fatigue, I told myself. Too too many long days, too many headlines, too much of too much everything. But the moment stayed with me, the way a faint ringing stays after a loud sound. And in the weeks that followed, I began to hear other people describe their own small vanishings. My mind feels slower now. I lose words. Sometimes I forget what I'm saying mid sentence. I'm not broken, but I'm different. None of us none of us thought to call it a symptom. We called it life. The story beneath the story. It wasn't until the MRI studies came out, the ones comparing brain scans taken before and after COVID infection, that I realized these small disappearances were part of a larger story, a story happening inside millions of people, quietly like a tide pulling back from the shore. Scientists described brain shrinkage in regions tied to memory, smell, and executive function. They described disrupted white matter pathways, altered connectivity, and neuroinflammation that lingered long after the virus had left the body. But what struck me most was not the science, it was the idea that the pandemic had left a fingerprint inside the brain, a faint thinning, a subtle rearrangement of the place where our thoughts live. We survived the virus, but some part of us, however small, had changed. Walking through the altered landscape I once knew, I began to see it everywhere. I saw it in the coworker who paused longer than usual before answering a question. I saw it in the friend who struggled to recall a name she had always known. I saw it in myself, in the way my thoughts sometimes feel like birds startled from a tree, scattering, then circling back slowly. None of this was catastrophic. None of it was dramatic. But it but it was real, and it made me wonder, what does it mean for a society when millions of people experience even slight changes in cognition? What does it mean for classrooms, workplaces, families, futures? We talk about the pandemic as something that happened outside us, in hospitals, in schools, in public health dashboards. But is another pandemic, quieter and more intimate, unfolding inside the skull. It is the pandemic of fog, of slowed thinking, of emotional drift, of the subtle sense that the world has become harder to hold in the mind. The brain's long memory. Scientists explain the, the mechanism with precision. Neuroinflammation that smolders like embers, microvascular injury that starves neurons of oxygen, loss of sensory input from months without smell, immune confusion that behaves like misfired lightning. Disrupted networks that once fired like a symphony. But beneath the science is a more human truth. The brain remembers what the body forgets. It carries trauma in ways we do not always recognize. It reshapes itself in response to storms. COVID 19 was a storm. Some trees bent, some branches snapped, some soil washed away. And and now we are walking through the altered terrain, the hope that lives in the neurons. Here is the part of the story that matters most. The brain is not mon, monument. The brain is not. The brain is not a monument. It is a river. It's a forest. It's it is a city that rebuilds itself every night while we sleep. Neuroplasticity is real. Recovery is possible. The brain can regrow connections, strengthen pathways, rec- reclaim territory that was lost. But recovery requires recognition. It requires tenderness. It requires a willingness to speak openly about what COVID-19 has done to us, not just our lungs, but our minds. A call to honesty. We are a nation eager to move on, but moving on does not mean pretending the virus never touched the brain. It means acknowledging the quiet injuries, the losses. Different now. It means believing them. It means refusing to let science or silence become another syndrome or symptom. COVID-19 reshaped the human brain, not dramatically, not universally, but undeniably. And if we want to heal individually, collectively, we must begin by telling the truth. Here's a more sweeping societal wide angled narrative. Still poetic, still intimate, but now scaled to the level of communities, nations, and the collective mind. Okay, guys, here you go. The Thinning of the World, a sweeping narrative op ed on COVID and the quiet shrinking of human brain. It began with individuals, a forgotten word, here a moment of fog there, but it has grown to something larger, something woven through the fabric of our shared life. What we once thought of as private lapses now form a quiet chorus, a collective softening of the edges of thought. COVID-19 did not only move through bodies, it moved through societies, leaving behind a subtle erosion in the organ that shapes how we learn, work, decide, and imagine. We have spent years tallying deaths, hospitalizations, and electronic economic losses, but we have not yet reckoned with the pandemic's most intimate legacy, the quiet shrinking of the human brain, unfolding across millions of people like a tide pulling back from the shore of our collective cognition. A nation of small disappearances. In the early months, the stories were personal. A teacher forgetting the name of a student she had taught for years. A nurse losing her train of thought during a shift. A parent struggling to recall a simple recipe. These moments felt isolated, most trivial, the kind of forgetfulness we blame on stress or exhaustion. But as the months turned into years, the pattern sharpened, the stories multiplied. They began to echo one another. I feel slower now. My mind doesn't hold things the way it used to. I'm not myself the same way. These weren't these were not dramatic symptoms. They were small vanishings, but they were happening everywhere. And then the MRI studies arrived, revealing what the stories had been trying to tell us. COVID 19 had left a measurable imprint inside the brain. Even in people who had mild illness, even in people who never saw the inside of a hospital. The pandemic had not only changed our world, it changed our minds, the collective brain. We rarely think of cognition as shared resource, but it is a society's ability to function, to teach children to innovate, to govern, to care for one another. Depends on the cognitive health of its people. When millions experience even slight changes in memory, attention, or processing speed, the effects ripple outward. They ripple into classrooms where children struggle to retain academic ground lost during months of remote learning. They ripple into workplaces where employees feel mentally stretched, slower to adapt, quicker to fatigue. They ripple through families where conversations feel different, where patience thins, where emotional sadness wavers. We are living through a moment when the collective brain, the sum of our individual minds, feels altered, not broken, not diminished, beyond repair, but changed. And we have not yet learned how to talk about it. The science beneath the story. Scientists describe the mechanisms with clarity. Neuroinflammation that lingers like smoke after a fire. Microvascular injury that starves neurons of oxygen. Loss of sensory input from months without smell. Immune confusion that behaves like misfired lightning. Disrupted neural networks that once fired effortlessly. But beneath the science is a societal truth. The pandemic reshaped the collective landscape of of entire communities. It altered the way we think, remember, and respond. It changed the texture of daily life. And because these changes are subtle, they are easy to overlook until you begin to see them everywhere. The world after the storm. We are a society emerging from a storm. Some structures held, some cracked, some washed away entirely. And now we are walking through the altered terrain, trying to rebuild without fully understanding what was lost. We see it in the rise of burnout, in the struggle to retain focus, in the collective sense of mental fatigue that has become a kind of cultural background noise. We see it in the way conversations feel different, in the way decisions feel heavier, in the way creativity feels harder to summon. This is not weakness. It is not moral fatigue. It is the neurological aftermath of a global event, and it deserves recognition. The hope that lives, the hope that lives in communities. The most important part of this story is that the brain, individually and collectively, can heal. Neuroplasticity is real. Recovery is possible. Communities can regain cognitive strength. The way forests regrow after fire. Slowly, unevenly, but with astonishing resilience. But healing requires honesty, it requires investment, It requires a willingness to acknowledge that COVID 19 touched the brain and that the effects are not only personal but societal. We need public health messaging that speaks openly about neurological recovery. We need workplaces that understand cognitive fatigue. We need schools that recognize the cognitive cost of disrupted learning. We need communities that refuse to dismiss the quiet injuries people carry. A call to collective courage. We are eager to move on, but moving on does not mean pretending the virus never touched the mind. It means facing the truth with courage and compassion. It means recognizing that the pandemic reshaped not only our systems but our cognition. It means building a future that honors what we have endured. COVID 19 reshaped the human brain, not dramatically, not universally, but undeniably. Okay, guys, that is C for you. I will be back on after a little break. So for now, Gator Wellness, take care, folks.